Hi, I'm Wade from Thoroughbred Diesel, and today we're going to be installing a set of 15% over DDP injectors in our 6.7 Cummins. So when Adam and I sat down for 2024 and we were looking at videos that we wanted to do for the year, we realized in all the years we've been doing videos that we have not done a 6.7 injector installation. So we reached out to the guys at DDP, told them what our thoughts were, and we were wanting to do an injector installation video on the 6.7s. They immediately sent us a set of injectors that would pair well with the truck that we had chosen for the installation. So DDP sent us a set of 15% over 6.7 injectors, and this is the new hotness from DDP. DDP right now has really invested in their nozzle technology. The K-factor on the nozzles that Lenny and the guys at DDP are producing right now is honestly second to none. And you can look at the flow sheets that they send along with the with your common rail injection from DDP, and this is just testing results and really a testament to how tightly balanced and mirrored these injectors are. It can be seen inside these sheets, so you know exactly when you get this sheet, these testing results, what each one of your injectors are doing, and you can pair those up to the balance rates on the truck if you really want to dial that in, and just for a really good drivability. But with DDP, you know, they're always pushing the envelope on the test stand equipment that they've got inside of their shop, now their nozzle technology and all of that. So as far as common rail injection goes, these guys are at the forefront of that. Now, our core customer, honestly, here at Thoroughbred Diesel is your 500 to 600 horsepower guys. We wanted to showcase an injector that was not going to be overwhelming to the stock CP3 with correct tuning, of course, and was going to give you great drivability without sacrificing, you know, when you start crossing that line in horsepower to where the truck is not really, I don't know how to say this the best way, not as quite as fun. You're creating a different animal when you go above that 600 horsepower rate. So for you 500 to 600 horsepower guys, these are going to be the injectors that are going to be these injectors are going to pair very well for you if those are your horsepower goals. Now this truck here has got the supporting fuel mods as far as lift pump and stuff goes, all of those inputs, but it's also got a light turbo on it, light drop-in performance turbo, so these injectors are going to really shine for that. So big shout out to the guys at DDP for sending these injectors for this installation, and this video is going to serve as our knowledge base for you guys that are looking for a how-to of how to change injectors out on a 6.7 Cummins in a Dodge pickup truck. So let's go ahead and get started with our installation. All right, we're under the hood now. We're gonna go ahead and start working on this engine to go ahead and install our DDP injectors. First thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna isolate your battery cables on both batteries, because we are gonna be unhooking several sensors here and we don't want any trouble. And then this truck, we have the Banks Ram air intake on. If you've got this on your truck, you don't need me to show you how to take it off. You've installed it, you know what goes into that. So my first thing that I do on this truck, even with a stock intake, is I work on getting this intake horn off of the driver's side of the engine and getting that side of the engine cleared up, because most of the work that you're going to be doing obviously is going to be on the driver's side of the engine here. Your fuel rails on the driver's side of the engine, your lines and everything are going to be on this driver's side of the engine. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to video this because you don't need to see it, but we are going to be removing the Banks intake horn here, and then we'll be moving on towards getting everything set up to clear everything to be able to take the valve cover off. After we've got our air intake off and we've got everything plugged up so we don't drop anything in the intake runner or the intake pipe, the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be working to get this wiring harness off of the top of the valve cover. We're not going for the valve cover just yet, but we are going to be going for our crankcase breather here. So and it's one assembly, and to get that out, we're going to have to take the wiring harness off. Actually, the wiring harness is actually not, well, anyway, you'll want to take the wiring harness off. So first sensor that you've got here is the large brown one, and we're going to pop it off, and then you'll come to the motor here and you'll pop that one off. That's got a red safety latch on it, and trying to film and get sensors off is awful. There it is. All right, and then it's attached to the crankcase breather there. Then we're going to take this next sensor off, this next pressure sensor. We're going to get it. And then unhook that. All right, and then at the back of the crankcase breather, there's one more. So then that's going to let that wiring harness pretty much out of your way. There's one more sensor on the breather right here, and then that pretty much will have that wiring harness ready for its next step. I'm going to go ahead and get that back sensor off of the breather. There's that. All right. So that's got our wiring harness. Now we're down to, we will get our injector harnesses off, and we're not there yet. Next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be getting this hose off of this breather right here. So we'll get a pair of pliers real quick. I didn't bring those with us, so let me grab those and I'll pop that off, and then we'll show you taking this crankcase breather off. Got my hose clamp off I was showing you there on this breather, and we're ready to pull this upper crankcase breather cover off here. So to do that, you get that hose clamp, of course, and then there's 8 bolts that hold this to the valve cover. You've got 4 bolts on this side, 10 metric head, 1, 2, 3, and 4 back there at the back. Then you've got 2 8 metric studs, 1 and 2, and then 2 more 10 millimeter bolts, 1 and 2, so for a total of 8. And then you take the oil fill cap off before you remove this. I'm gonna kind of set the camera up here and see if I can do this as best I can one-handed. So we'll remove that, we'll go in, we'll take our bolts out, just like so. 2 studs, voila. Try to hold the camera down as best I can here. So you just want to kind of rock it back and forth to get it dislodged from the crankcase breather, and then watch your hose there on that side, and then that cover comes right off. I can show you that just like so, and then that leaves you with the actual crankcase filter exposed. To get it off, just put underneath of it and just rock it up ever so gently, and then take that out. And then before I go any farther, I like to stop right there, put my oil fill cap back on, make sure I've got it on, and there you go. So now you're ready to work on the rest of the wiring harness here, just to kind of get that off, and then we can go after the valve cover. So now that we've got our crankcase breather cover, we're really working to get this wiring harness set over to the side. So the next portion of that is, and I just kind of work systematically through it. You've got our clip here that holds the wiring harness back to the dipstick. So we just go ahead and trip that with our pick, just like so. And that'll get that to where we can move it out of the way. And then the last 2 connections that we have are for our at the valve cover, so our injector control. So the first one, what I do is I just take the foam and I just move it out of my way, just like that. Okay, you can kind of see it. And then I use a pick underneath of the harness like so, and then just take my finger and get the connector started up like so. And once I do that, very gently, we'll move it with the wires, just like so. Get that out of your way. So next one I've got to do the back one as I can. But again, what you want to do there is you want to get this wiring harness as much out of your way as you can. If you need to, you can move the bell trip connector here, so you can trip this and get the big portion of the harness out of your way, and then that gives you a little bit more dexterity there, a little bit more opportunity to move it. So to get to that back one, you really have got to go ahead and just work on getting the foam out. Adam's going to show you where that is. This is another one of our crankcase breather tubes. I take this smooth pick and I go all the way around it, and then I grab it with my hand, pop it off like so. Okay, so we've got the tube out of the way. So now what we can do there is we can work towards getting this foam noise isolator out. I go all the way to the back and get my hand on it and then just work it out here past everything. Just be careful as you go. And pull that out like so. Set it to your side. This exposes your fuel rail as well. So remember, our goal was to get this wiring harness out. Last connection is back there at the injector controls there. So I'm gonna do the same thing I did. Get my pick on it and get it moving. Once you get one side moving, you've pretty well got it, like so. And voila, you have got your wiring harness out of the way there for right now, as far as it needs to go. That is good for where we are. That will allow you to access everything that you need to access pretty much on the fuel rail. If you want to, you can go through here and you can pop it out off those studs, kind of get it out of your way. But we'll deal with that as we go along there. You're in pretty good shape now to go ahead and pull the valve cover. Really, to make it safer on yourself, and I said wrong there. I said that the next thing you would go after there would be the valve cover. You know, you really want to limit the amount of time that you have the valve cover off of the truck. So the easiest way to do that, and then that way you are limiting the chance of something going wrong and you dropping something down inside the valve cover and losing it, is at this point here, you go ahead and you pull your fuel lines and your injector feed tubes. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to go ahead and start getting set up to pull these feed lines and get these feed tubes out of there, and we'll pop those out. And then what that's going to give us the ability to do is limit the amount of time that we've actually got the valve cover off of the truck. And that's what we want to do. Then that way we can go in, we can pop our injectors in, boop, 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 and do our feed tubes. But again, it just limits the time that we just don't have to have the valve cover off the truck. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to go ahead and remove all of the high pressure lines going over to the cylinder head. And when you do this, go ahead and remove all these lines. I'll take the lines and I'll move back on tailgate, put them on a piece of cardboard, and keep them in orientation as to where they go. So as you remove the lines, as you remove them, you get a better better space to loosen up the rest of them. So I'll do a line and then remove the feed tube. So we're going to do the number 1 and the number 2 line. We're going to show you how to do that, and then we're going to cut and go ahead and get all of these lines off the truck. So here we go. First thing that I'll do is I'll actually remove the line at the rail, and then I'll come to the cylinder head, and these are 19 and 24 metric. I'm gonna let Adam's working on his light there. So when I do the cylinder head, I want to make sure that I leave pressure on the feed tube nut, and I'll get a 24 metric and I'll do that. So I'll position my 24 metric, and you'll have different ways that you'll do this, and if you need to use different wrenches, do that. I will hold pressure on the feed tube nut while I'm loosening the line. In fact, on these trucks that have got high mileage on them, what I'll do is I'll actually come in here and I'll spray a little bit of PV Blaster or penetrating oil on this and let it soak overnight, so that I'm able to get the feed tube hold down nut loosened without a whole lot of trouble. And the feed tube hold down nut, and if you're not familiar with this, 5.9 and 6.7 common rail trucks have got a feed tube. Actually, the VP trucks do too, but they've got a feed tube here. And that feed tube has got a kind of an orienting dowel right there inside of it. You can see that. If you turn the lines and the lines actually are kind of rusted or corroded to the feed tube, it's going to try to turn the feed tube. And if the feed tube turns in the bore, it can actually damage that bore of the cylinder head, and you don't want that. So what we like to do is we like to keep a little bit of pressure on the feed tube hold down nut, and that seems to do a pretty good job of allowing you to loosen those up. So showed you how to do that. We've removed this line already and got it done, and I'm gonna pop this feed tube out and show you how to do that. So I'll lay this I'll lay this line over and out of our way for just a second here. You'll have a little bit of residual fuel that you'll lose, but no big deal. So let's show you how to pop out one of the feed tubes. So you can see my feed tube there and my hold down nut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 24 metric here. I'm going to just loosen up my hold down nut there, and then I kind of watch it and make sure that the feed tube itself is not turning. If it is, what I do is I like to just kind of work it back and forth there, and working it back and forth seems to give me, just get it to where it'll break loose and come on and turn out for me, just like so. So we'll go ahead and get our feed tube hold down nut off of the feed tube itself. And now there's a couple different ways that you can do this next step. To remove the feed tube, if you can simply get a screwdriver and pop the feed tube out, and that's what most of you guys are going to do. We keep a little feed tube tool here at the shop. This is a little feed tube tool from Snap-on. Part number on this, I think, is a CJI 44. This will actually screw onto the feed tube itself like so, and it will allow you to use like one of these little heel bars to actually pop the feed tube out without damaging the threads on it. So that's the feed tube there that is engaged into the injector. So we'll remove those, and I'll do each one of those again. We leave the valve cover on here and we do these feed tubes, and this just keeps contaminants out of the engine. I've already loosened this one up, loosened this line up too. So we'll remove that line. We'll go in here with our 24 metric, put a little pressure on that feed tube, get it kind of rocking. And then go ahead and remove the nut. And I will, the feed tube hold down nuts, I will actually keep the orientation of them correct, because I like to, it's just what I do. Put my little tool on here, pop the feed tube out like so. We'll clear the rail, and there you are. And you can see where you get corrosion. This is a 20,000 mile truck. You can get a little bit of corrosion in there. We like to always replace the feed tubes when we do an injector job. I definitely suggest that, especially on your high mileage trucks. So that's what we're going to do. So we've got our feed tubes out, and you guys are going to say, oh man, he's going to leave us with the hard ones, he's not going to show us. But there's really not a whole lot that I can show here, and the filming is going to get more difficult. You're the same thing, you're trying to get the lines off. So this number 3 is back here, actually the 4 position on the rail. The 4 is actually on the 3 position on the rail. 5 and 6 are where they're supposed to be back there on the rail. I know you're not getting a whole lot of light. I'm gonna give you a little bit of light there. There you go. So your 5 and your 6 are in the position on the rail. Getting back to the number 6 line is actually not as bad as it looks. Once you get the number 5 line out of your way, which this is your number 5 line, once you get the number 5 line out of your way, it's really not that bad to do 6. So don't be scared of 6. 6 is a walk in the park. So we're gonna go ahead and get these fuel lines off and get ready to take this valve cover off. We have got all of our high pressure fuel lines to our injectors removed down the rail there, and you can see that. Now, several different combinations of wrenches that I use to be able to get all of my high pressure lines and all of my feed tubes out with everything intact here. And that saved me a little bit of time, but just to be 100% honest with you, when you go back with this, one of the most important things that you can do on this job, there's 2 things that are going to make this job just go flawlessly for you. 1 is always change your feed tubes out, put new feed tubes in when you do this, and 2 is torque everything down correctly. It's going to get you out of hard starts, misalignment of the injectors, all that, and we're going to talk about that. So for you to be able to get these torques applied to the feed tubes correctly, you're going to need to remove the fuel rail. The fuel rail has got 2 studs. You can see those right here. And then you got 2 bolts. They're back here. all you have to do is remove those, remove the return line, remove the high pressure line, and the fuel rail will lift out of here. It'll take you 5 minutes to do it, but I promise you it'll make this job 100% easier for you as you're going through it. If you go through and you have a problem getting your feed tubes out, this number 4 cylinder right here, because of the air intake temperature sensor, can be really cumbersome. Sometimes it's easier when you take the lines off of the rail, just go ahead and take the rail out and then go after your feed tubes. Personal preference, but I'm going to drop these bolts out of this fuel rail right here real quick, and I'm going to remove the fuel rail. I said 1924, that's what I use here. That's 19 and 24, so 19 for your lines, 24 for your feed tube hold down nuts. You know, you can use 3/4 and 15/16 as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get my fuel rail out here, and then we'll pop our valve cover off. One thing I didn't make mention of when you remove the fuel rail, this banjo bolt has got a sealing washer on both sides, so make sure when you take the rail out, you watch for those sealing washers. And then at the back of the rail, of course, we have got your fuel rail pressure sensor. I'm trying to find a light here so I can get to it. There, try to not to flood it out there. But this fuel rail pressure sensor has got a yellow locking tab on it. You can kind of see that right there. That yellow locking tab has to be pushed back before the wiring harness can be removed from it. You just simply pinch it and take it out there. So that don't forget to unplug that fuel rail pressure sensor. Again, you're just trying to give yourself room to get in here to be able to do your torques, and this will, removing the fuel rail will allow you to do that. Got our fuel rail off here, so we've got our pathway cleared to do our torques on our feed tubes, and we can do them correctly this way. Now it's time to remove the valve cover. The valve cover is going to be have 10 metric headed bolts that hold it down to the rocker box. So you have 2 here in the very front, you've got 2 in the middle, and then underneath of the cowling back there, back there, you've got 2 more. So 6 of these in total that hold the valve cover down. You don't have to take them out, you just got to loosen everything up if you want to take them out. You know, you don't have to, but it's up to you. But they can stay right where they are. They go through a grommet here, all things. So the one thing that you'll run into with the valve cover, and you won't, there's nothing really that you're going to run into, but getting the valve cover separated from the valve cover gasket. And you can kind of see this is the valve cover, that's the valve cover gasket. The valve cover gasket includes the integrated wiring harness for the injectors. So if you pull that valve cover up and those plugs are coming with it, that means it's stuck together and you've got to get it separated. So I'm going to hand the GoPro to Adam. He's going to be doing a little bit of film work for us here, and I'm going to show you just bringing the valve cover off. And what I like to do is just run my hand underneath of it, get everything separated from the valve cover gasket, and then I try to bring my valve cover straight out. You just got to really watch everything at the back there to make sure that you're going to clear. And then voila, valve cover comes out, and we'll lay it on the back of the truck. Once you get your valve cover off, you will find the dumbest design valve cover wiring harness known to man. All right, so on the 6.7s, you have a plastic tang that comes off of the valve cover harness that holds your solenoid wires for your injectors. But you'll notice that this stupid plastic tab covers up one of the injector hold down bolts. So guess what? You've got to pull the injector, valve cover harness off. So 8 metrics here, and you want to be careful when you're doing this. A couple of different things here. The nuts that are on the wiring harness, they're captive to the wiring harness itself, so they're not going to fall off in the engine. But you don't want to just take that for granted, because one of them could have got bent by somebody else that you don't know about. So just really watch what you're doing around here, because you drop one of these, you can drop it down the motor, and that would be for a bad day. So the valve cover harness has actually got these little legs that hold it down to the rocker box. So what you want to do when you go to pull this out is you're actually going to you're actually just going to lift straight up on this and then pull it out. And I make sure that my solenoid wires are off of the terminals so they don't get hung on the terminals. The continuity of the wires doesn't matter, but you can always remember this: blue right, yellow right, red right. That's the yellow wires on the right hand side of the solenoid, the blue wires always on the right hand side of the solenoid, and the red wires always on the right hand side of the solenoid. So we're going to lift this valve cover up. I thought that Adam was still out here and he could help me film, but he can't. So here with another GoPro action shot for you. So we're going to lift the valve cover straight up like this, and then we can bring it straight out of the truck. Here's what I'm going to tell you is probably the most important part of this video, is the removal and the installation of these injectors. So when I'm doing it, I will take an injector out and reinstall. So we're going to break this down into two pieces. And I'm OCD about how I sequence some of this. You don't have to do this way, but the things that I'm going to teach you or show you here are to try to keep the job from going sideways from you. So when you remove the injectors of the 6.7, the exhaust rocker has got to come off. So it's got a 10 metric bolt in the center of it, and we'll go ahead and remove that. Now, just depending on the position of your engine, the engine could have, this exhaust valve could have pressure on it. That's perfectly normal. When you lift up on it, make sure you break that hydraulic seal that's on the push rod. It's just where that's in the push rod there. So I keep a box close to me, and that I just put a rocker in it at a time as I go. That just saves you on your oil mess. And then the injector is actually held down by two 8 metric headed bolts. I'll take the front one completely out. All right, and then I've marked the position where they are forward or backwards in the box here. So I just pop this bolt out completely and position it where it's forward in my box. But my back one, I will loosen up quite a bit, like so. And then I've got a little heel bar to pop these injectors out. So the 6.7 hold down bracket will actually come off of the injector, which is a little bit different than the 5.9. 5.9 will too, but not in the truck. Depending on the position of your intake rocker, it may not flow past. So the one thing I don't like to do is I don't like to pry the injector by the little roll pin that is the orientation pin for the injector hold down. I hate to pry by that. I just don't like it. I'm sure some of you guys do it, it worked just fine, but I just don't like it. I'm afraid of it flying out and going to the engine. Maybe it never will, whatever. There's a lip on the injector here that's below the solenoid cap. When I loosen that bolt up, I just take my little heel bar here and I use that and I pry up on the injector and get it loose from the bore. And once I've done that, then I'll remove my back bolt completely, orient it in the front of my box so I know where it goes. Wipe my hands off, and I'll grab a rag and I'll pop that injector right out. Now where the injector is loose and you can turn it, this will come past that intake rocker, but again, that comes completely off. So you want to make sure when you bring it out that your copper compression washer came with it. Super important. Set it in the box, and then we'll come back and we're going to do our install of our injector. If you don't do anything else that I ask you to do here, just make sure that you do this. This is the most critical portion of this installation, is the actually install the injectors themselves. So first thing that we do is we take our injectors, put a little bit of assembly lube on our O-ring and our copper compression washer to make sure that it stays on as you're installing it. And you will want to orient the injector itself with this is where your feed tube goes. So that needs to be oriented to the outside or towards the rocker levers. And then what we'll do is we'll put the injector down inside of the bore. And I've already got it in my hand, so I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to go ahead and put the injector in. All right. And I get it lined up about where I think the feed tube is going to go, and then I leave this little cap on the DDP sends for you, and then I just push it down until you hear it click, like so. Then you can remove that cap. That cap's nice to protect the solenoid however you want to do it. Before we push those in, and I talk about this little tool all the time, Alliant Power makes this tool. We keep them around the shop. This is a little bore brush. Use it to clean that bore out real good before you seat that injector. Compressed air to get it out, brake clean, whatever. but we'd already cleaned that bore. So now our feed tube. Again, second most critical part of this is to use a new feed tube. We've got assembly lube on here, and you've got your locating dowel. This goes up when you put this into the cylinder head. So we'll put that in the cylinder head. I'll run it back and forth, and I can feel the resistance there. That means I've got it in the channel. And then again, we push this until it clicks, like so. When we do that, should be installed an injector body. So to make sure that it is, what I do is I take the injector and I just pinch it by the top of the injector head, and I watch for my feed tube. I watch for my feed tube to wiggle there. So you can see it kind of wiggling. So I'll go about halfway between my wiggle, very technical terms, and that's where I'll stop. I'll put my injector hole down. The rounded portion of the injector hole down goes towards the rockers, so it goes to the driver's side, and then the rounded portion of that goes down, as you can see. So I'll slip that over the injector body. Now remember, if this is one of the injector bodies that you had problems with getting across the intake, you want to put that injector hole down on before you put the injector down in the bore. You'll know what I mean when you get there. And then we want to install our injector hold down bolts. And we will not tighten these. We will just simply be taking them down, and we turn them. The manual tells you to turn them at 90 degrees at a time, but you'll know what to do here. You'll be a mile off of it when you get there. So you'll want to tighten those bolts down, like I said, alternating. And about the time they just touch the cap of the injector, you'll want to stop. You don't want to put any pressure on it. You just want to run these bolts down. Again, by the time you feel it touch the cap of the injector hold down, that's when you want to stop. Okay, so now what we'll do is we take our feed tube nut. We'll go ahead and install our feed tube nut into the cylinder head, and we're going to make our first in these very important torque sequences of the feed tube nut to make your initial set of it. So you want to seat the feed tube nut right here at about 11 foot-pounds is what the Cummins manual tells you. So this is just going to basically hold the feed tube into position while you're working, and not much. So there we are. So that's our first torque. And then we go in on our injector, and we're going to put our final torque. Now, if you're used to doing this on a 5.9 Cummins, you know what the torque value for that is, but the torque value is different for the 6.7. The injector hold down torque is 71 inch-pounds. So we are going to turn this about 90 degrees at a time until we get to that torque value, because this torque value, again, is critical. So 71 inch-pounds is what you're looking for your torque wrench to click at. There's my click off. Then go to my front one. I'll check my back. Check my front. There we go. And now we set our final torque on our feed tube, and the final torque on the feed tube is 34 foot-pounds. So we're going to run our torque wrench up to 34. And here we go. Adam's looking at me, telling me we lost a light. I don't know what's going on, Adam, but here's our torque on this. Now we'll set this final torque in on the feed tube. And torque meters went off, and that's it. That's setting it in. This is critical because this is a sealing surface. Well, this is a sealing surface seal. I don't know what the correct way to say that is, but it is critical that you get these feed tubes set right, because if you don't, again, you're going to have hard starts, and that's just not what you want. So you want to set those in there and get these values right. So final torque here, first torque on your feed tube, 11 foot-pounds. Come in, put your injector hold down bolts in, take them to their final torque of 71 foot-pounds. Then you come back out and you do your final torque on your feed tube hold down is 34 foot-pounds. So we've got our DDP 50 horsepower injector in. We're going to put our rocker lever on. You want to torque your rocker lever down to 27 foot-pounds. And there you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, we're going to get all these injectors in, get all of our torques done, and then we're going to come back and we're going to show you our valve cover. But don't forget, put your rocker lever on. You know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. I'm gonna go ahead and do it while we're here. So when you reinstall your rocker lever, you want to get your rocker lever set in there correctly. You want to make sure the ball of the rocker lever engages the push rod. So that's very critical. And then you want to make sure that your valve bridge is obviously there and installed. And your torque value here is going to be 27 foot-pounds. And I don't have, I'm going to have to improvise here because I don't have my 10 metric ready to go at 27 foot-pounds, 3/8 drive ratchet. So came up here ill prepared at them. So let's cut for just a second. We'll come back, we'll show you how to torque that down. So put your rocker lever on. If the rocker lever had pressure on it, you want to draw it down, make sure that you keep your push rod lined up good, make sure everything is lined up correctly on the valve bridge side. Then you want to click this torque off at 27 foot-pounds. So there you go. So there's your DDP injector installed and ready to go. We've got our feed tube in, torque down. Remember, 11 foot-pounds on your first torque. Torque down your injector to 71 inch-pounds, 71 inch-pounds, and then come back and your final torque on your feed tube at 34 foot-pounds. So put the rest of these injectors in here and we'll come back and we'll show you our valve cover. All right, we're gonna set the valve cover harness now. And when you set your valve cover harness, you just really wanna watch these legs. The legs have got to sit on top of the rocker box and not get broken, because they're plastic, so they can be brittle. So you know you've got it when it seals against that rocker box like so. So you just sit the valve cover harness down. And then probably the next most important part of this installation is not over tightening the solenoid nuts here. So your solenoid nuts, remember what we said, everything on the right, you're talking yellow, red, and blue on the right. And when you install these, you want to, number one, you want to make sure you get them on straight, don't cross thread them. And then the second part of it is don't over tighten them. If you over tighten these, what's going to happen is it stretches the solenoid terminal and you lose continuity to the injector. So when we tighten them down, I just take my 8 metric socket and I just run it down and I just make it finger tight against the injector. The actual torque spec to this, I think, is 13 inch-pounds, but there's no sense in putting a torque ratchet on this and checking it, because if you do that, you've probably overdone it. Finger tight, that's all you need. You do that with a socket, you will not over tighten them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through and tighten all these, then we'll get our valve cover on. And you can go ahead and set your valve cover down on your front valve cover and then go for your injector lines. All right, so we're going to install our valve cover now. So just again, watch your bolts as you go back through here. And this is your last chance, double check everything, make sure that your push rods are engaged to the rocker arms and everything else there. So you just go ahead and drop your valve cover on, watch your back bolts, get it lined up where it needs to go before you start down with the valve cover itself. Then it will engage the valve cover as so, just kind of working back and forth. And you've got everything you need. Valve cover bolts, you'll put those on. Those are 10 metrics, and then we can torque those down. I'll get these started. 18 foot-pounds on these, but don't get too over crazy with it. So when I say I've got that third one, or those back two down, then I'll go through on torque and sequence, and I'll start in the middle and then torque front to back. So 18 foot-pounds, and then we'll torque everything down. Okay, we're gonna set our fuel rail in here real quick now that we've got our valve cover on. So just set your fuel rail down on its locations. I know this is gonna look a little bit different than what you've got because of our Banks intake here. So we'll go ahead and remember that your studs go to the outside and the bolts go to your inside locations, and you just want to hand tighten these. You don't want to put your final torque on these. Final torque, by the way, is 212 inch-pounds that is. And the reason being for that is we're going to put our fuel lines on and then take our fuel lines to their final torque, and then we will torque the bolts down for the fuel rail. So that's the way that has to be done, and that's the way that it's correct. So I'll put my last bolt in back here, And then I'm going to get my fuel lines. Actually, I won't do that. Told you wrong, folks. I'm going to put my supply line in right here. Make sure that starts correctly. And then I'll get my banjo bolt here for our return, and I'll get that installed. But again, we're going to leave all this hand tight until we get our fuel lines on and get our final torques on our fuel lines. So we're going to do our fuel lines now. That's the next thing. With fuel lines, just like we showed you before, we want to hold with our 24 metric, and then we want to tighten these down. I've got a wrench here, but you're going to want to torque these. These lines need to be torqued to 26 foot-pounds, both at the injector side and at the rail side. So that's the easiest way to do that. You notice this line's a little bit different again with our Banks intake manifold. So I did this one because this is the easiest one for us to start with. We'll actually start back there on 6 and then work our way forward. And then once we get all of our lines on, we will tighten down our return line, tighten down our supply line, and then we will go ahead and put the wiring harness back on the studs back here, which Adam's going to show you those. You can get the wiring harness back on the studs, and yeah, then you're good to go. You've got your lines on. But biggest thing there, again, hold that nut so you don't make sure that you're not over tightening your feed tubes. So we're going to put our crankcase filter in. Remember, this is just to sit it down and push it, but to make sure that your O-rings are in place and where they need to be there. Just take your crankcase filter. Hey, and if you're at the service interval, this is a good time to change it. We are not with this truck, so we're going to sit that down on top, and then we're going to remove our oil cap for just a second. And we're going to set our secondary cover on to the truck as soon as we turn it the right direction. And before we set it all the way down, we've got our hose over here at the EGR cooler, or it goes across the EGR cooler. We'll hook it up, and then make sure that you get this set down right. Put your oil fill cap back on. There you go. And then put your 8 bolts in. I showed you where the studs go versus where the bolts go, so you get them out and you just snug this down. We've got our world famous piece of foam here that go down over our injector line. So last time that you're going to get to look back through there, just to make sure that everything is. I've got my wiring harness on the studs here, and it's critical because the way that the oil fill or the oil gauge is, the dipstick tube is, this wouldn't go and be loose unless you were on those standards. So I'm just going to go ahead and fish this piece of foam back through here till I get it where it's supposed to be. And you know that when you get to the cuts in the foam for the crankcase lines. So we're going to just kind of sneak it past that wiring harness. Just keep pushing. And keep feeding it. And it's got to go right there, just like so. Just kind of keep feeding everything back through there and get it set down. And once it sits where it's supposed to, you will have clearance right here and back there at the back. So that's where you want it. You've got enough clearance to get back in here to put your put your wiring harnesses on. So that's what we'll do here in just a second. So I'm going to go through, just do a little bit more finishing on this and make sure that I've got it sit down where I want it, and I do. The next thing, actually, while you're right here, before you go in, well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Your main wiring harness that comes across, it goes over to your EGR. It's nice to unfold that and have it unfolded and ready to go. And remember, you're going to make that clip on the wiring harness itself. So before you put that big main bail trip up for the engine, have this one ready to go dipstick tube. I'll just clip that on there, and that way I can move that wiring harness back as I need to, and then I can push my engine harness in back here. Push it down till it clips, like so. Then you've got your crankcase sensor that's gonna go right there. Push it till it clips, and then lock it. And then that's pretty well got you where you need to be here. Lock it on the dipstick right there. Now you can take your main computer bell trip connector, just go ahead and push it in, and then you've got a push pin for it that needs to go about right here. And then, sorry about that, Adam. That's got that where it needs to go. Then you lay your harness over to the next stud, and then to this next sensor. Lock it down, and then just keep following along. Standard on that stud, on the valve. Lock it down, and then next sensor right here, lock down. And there you are. There's a whole wiring harness laid over, and we can do our front wiring harness as well, so that all of your wiring is essentially done after this last little piece. So there you go, and we will move our crankcase tubes around where they need to be. We'll hook them up on our lines. There's that. I'll leave that one good for our intake, and there we are, just like we were never there. All right, don't do what I did, and you're good. And forget your air intake temperature sensor. It is underneath of there. It is the extension. Well, this won't be the extension of it, but it'll be this harness right here that goes underneath of the foam there, and it goes to the air intake harness. I had to take about half that harness and go back after, so don't forget that. Now, again, we've got the Banks intake on here, so I'm not going to show putting that back on. Just want to let you know we just get all of our wiring harness up here and ready to go before we put the intake back on. Try to have everything as lined up as we can. Don't forget to take our rags out, blah, blah, blah. So what we're going to do, we're going to get that intake on, and then we are going to come back and show you truck startup and what we do on a big common rail operation like this, where we've taken injectors out, and what we're going to be doing for our initial startup and what you're looking for. We just got finished up with our DDP injector install on this 6.7 truck. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of walk you through what you need to do on first startup, especially when you've done any type of common rail work. If you've had the rail off, you've had injectors off, you're going to have to cycle through on your cranking sequence so the system actually is able to, I hate to use the word prime. I hate to use the word prime because I'm always talking about low side field system when I do. For the system to feel and be able to start and make rail pressure. So you just want to make sure that you go over everything again, look for any sensors that you've forgotten, anything that you've forgotten. You know, the big thing on anything that you've done here, you want to make sure that you got your intercooler clamps tightened down so you're not out on your first test drive and you pop an intercooler boot. That's the worst. So when you crank on these trucks, you want to crank I like to crank about 5-7 seconds and then let the starter rest. Then another 5-7, let's start a rest, and the truck should start. If you go through 4 or 5 sequences and you don't get a start, probably want to get a scanner at that point, and then start monitoring rail pressure. Make sure you're making rail pressure. If you're not making rail pressure, then you probably want to suspect maybe that you missed a feed tube and to get a feed tube torqued down or something like that. So if you got a crank no start in an injector change, first thing you want to do on a common rail is go back through your feed tube torques, check them, make sure that they're good. So let's go ahead and fire her up and see how she sounds.
couple of key on cycles, and we're fired up and ready to go. I like to stay close to the door because if I hear something, if you have a pintle hang and something, when you're doing an installation on a common rail, if you have a contaminant that goes through the system, which is common that happens, you have a contaminant that goes in the system, you get something hung in the control valve, something hanging in the pintle of the nozzle, you might have it beating and banging, you want to shut it off at that time, but sounds good, sounds smooth. I think we got it. So, let me shut it down here real quick. You're looking for check engine lights here. When we go to start it again, you're looking for a hard start. You're looking for any of those things. You want to drive a truck normal. You want to let everything seat itself in. Be easy on it for a little while. Drive normally. But then after that, you just get out there and you enjoy the DDP goodness. So big shout out to the guys at DDP for sending these sets of 50 horsepower injectors. We're going to follow this video up in a couple weeks. We're going to get some drive time on it, bring the truck back in here. Going to tell you what we like about the injectors, check everything out and see what it looks like. So DDP 50 horsepower injectors for 6.7. DDP is on the is pushing the envelope for all of their nozzle work that they're doing. They're really making strides in the common rail market, and we're proud to be a partner of them. This 50 horsepower set of injectors we put in this truck should be paired very, very nicely with the turbo that we've got on it too. So if you got a question about DDP products or anything else common rail, just give us a call. Thanks for watching.